Warning, we are not your attorneys. Please, don't take anything we say as legal advice. I'm Geoff.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Derrick.
And you are listening to the Not So Grand Jury,
which is now sponsored by Morwa P. LLC.
Trigger warning. This episode will contain descriptions and discussions of sexual assault and torture and may be disturbing for some listeners.
So, everyone, welcome back to the Not So Grand Jury. You got 4 of us today, actually. So you got Derrick, Geoff, and Mike as per usual. You also have, and we briefly introduced her in the sidebar last week, but you have Colleen Moore, who is not only my sister and not only our unpaid editor of the podcast, but apparently a Law and Order SVU aficionado.
Dun dun.
Dun dun.
Executive producer Dick Wolf.
Should we clarify that none of us are paid? It's not like we're getting paid, but Colleen works for free.
Wait, I'm not getting paid?
I mean,
just for the record.
Okay, for the listeners, we're all poor. Yay, moving on. All right, we are doing this for you and for no other reason whatsoever. Colleen basically, as I said on the sidebar last week, she called my bluff when I said you could kind of do whatever you want with the podcast and said, I want to talk about SVU. And so we're going to talk about SVU, including we're going to talk about 2 different episodes of SVU, one this week and then one in 2 weeks, where we're basically talking about issues that are both a lot of fun and not exactly in any of our wheelhouses, which is going to be a lot of fun for this conversation. And I'm super excited if the masses in the world and the listeners want to tell us how dumb we are. It would actually be a lot of fun. But before we get there, Colleen, do me a favor and introduce yourself. Tell us about you, why the heck you like SVU, Law and Order, and if it's just for iced tea, and whatever else you want to tell us.
You know, I don't have a great answer why I like Law and Order SVU. I think this is a weird answer, but it's comforting to me because even on my worst days, I'm like, somebody else out there has it worse than me.
Listen, whatever gets you through the day.
That's all I really got on SVU. I don't know why I started to get into it. I think our mom watched a lot of Law and Order growing up. Not as much SVU, but I just kind of grew up with her watching like Blue Bloods and some of the other like Law and Order original recipes. So we just kind of grew up with the cop shows. And I got back into SVU a little bit later. I just find it very interesting. And I think especially episodes like this, like they do have very interesting takes on it, and it's not always the super media hype cases, which next week we'll be talking about the Casey Anthony one. Like that's a very cut and dry, like obviously SVU is probably going to do something around that. They do a lot of rip from the headlines, which I like, but they do things like this. Like you wouldn't necessarily think the case around Abu Ghraib and the Bush administration's torture program would be a Law and Order SVU episode, but they make it interesting. And so why I chose this episode is I thought that could be the closest thing that is relevant to my expertise. So my career has been in human rights and peace building advocacy. So I live in DC and predominantly do congressional advocacy around human rights, peace building, conflict resolution. And I really got into that because I grew up with the war on terror. I mean, I was only 7 when 9/11 happened. And so my whole life, essentially, we've been at war. And throughout high school, throughout college, it was always cases like this that we would learn about. I was, always curious about the world around me. And I never specifically worked on things like this with Abu Ghraib because I was too young, of course, but in a lot of my international law classes in college and in my master's program, my master's in international relations, we talked a lot about these cases. So I know a decent amount about public international law and the Geneva Conventions, obviously not as much as you all here do. But yeah, in my current role, I cover international peace building and disarmament advocacy. So I do a lot of Middle East work, East Asia work, Southeast Asia, nuclear disarmament, conventional disarmament, and as you saw on the sidebar last week, some gun violence prevention. That is a relatively new area to my portfolio in the last few years. So yeah, that's why I'm here. I don't add a lot as far as the expertise.
Well, I mean, let's clarify. So first off, you are the first guest we've had that is not a lawyer. However, I would also say you probably know more about international law than a vast majority of the lawyers we know who don't regularly practice international law in any capacity. So whether you know it or not, you add a lot to this conversation.
And I've dealt with the applicable side of it, of as we're messaging to the public, as we're working with grassroots activists, as I'm talking to Congress. I mean, you actually have to get into some of the nitty gritty while staying very surface level and talking about it in a way that makes sense to normal people. So I feel like in that way, I've been able to explore a lot of international law in a way that maybe as a lawyer, others haven't been able to. Yeah.
No, completely fair. But also for the listener, Colleen mostly created the outline for this episode. I do like the fact that when we have guests on, apparently they put the effort in. I remember Andrea said when we were on the podcast that she did like 20-page outline or something.
Oh,
Colleen's was a paltry like 5 single space, so we need to work with her on that. But
I could have added so much more in the plot summary, but I'm like, we're not going to talk about the plot for like 40 minutes. And I mean, my bullet point was continuous jurisdiction, question mark. Is that a thing that makes sense here?
Well, we'll find out. I'm not sure if we necessarily know. But nevertheless, all right, go into the plot summary. Tell the reader what the heck happened in this. Although I would recommend you watch the episode. It's a very interesting episode, but try to give us a good plot summary that doesn't take 40 minutes.
Okay, so for context setting, so this is season 9 of SVU. It takes place in 2007. For context, SVU is currently in its 26th season. They were just renewed for a 27th. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, Olivia Benson, Mariska Hargitay, been at it since 1999. Ice-T started in season 2. So yeah, these people, I don't know how they're still doing this, to be honest.
The Ice-T having been in that long is absolutely amazing.
I didn't realize that. I thought he came in much later than that.
Yeah, season.
No, he came in real
2,
early.
yeah.
And my favorite part about it is even in seasons the 20s, like he still acts like he's never done this before, and it's the best part of Ice-T.
Ice-T is a detective with the Special Victims Unit. He handles New York's most sensitive cases. I love Ice-T on SVU. He is fantastic. He's awesome. What's so great about him is that he's been with the SVU for like 11 years now. But he still treats every case like it's his first in terms of total confusion. Sometimes they'll be in the middle of an investigation and Ice-T will be like, yo, you telling me this dude gets off on little girls with pigtails? It's like, yeah, Ice. He's a pedophile. You work in the sex crimes division. You're gonna have to get used to that.
I also just don't know how they're still coming up with new ideas. I mean, it's like 600, 700, something like that. And I will say in the early 20s, it was getting a little much. I think they're bringing it back though. Like actually this current season, I'm like, okay, like I don't know how you're still doing this and it's still interesting, but somehow they still are. So again, for just context setting of where we're at in SVU, this is still featuring Elliot Stabler and Olivia Benson as the leads. Stabler leaves at the end of season 12, so we're still kind of in the middle of his arc. Okay, so for the opening of this episode, the cold open starts in Central Park, which is never a good sign. Just don't go into Central Park, not at night. Something bad's gonna happen, probably, according to SVU. I don't know. So a woman's found dead. She's stabbed and her underwear is pulled down, so it seems to be a clear SVU case. She's also found to have some kind of lesion that even Chief Medical Examiner Melinda Warner has no idea what it is, so also not a great sign if she doesn't even know what it is. So the woman turns out to be Kate Symes. She was a college counselor at a swanky New York private school. She's been having trouble at school with a student, Jackie, who made the most ridiculous, offensive music video about terrorists. Can we just talk about that?
Sure.
Yeah, let's spend some time on that.
This is where Geoff and Mike can actually add the most, I think, on some of the stuff here. I think they're going to really add some good commentary to this.
I mean, I am not a music critic, but
I don't think you have to be for this.
This was so very early 2000s that there was almost a degree of, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but it was, very, very mild PTSD that was raised. I think I watched this episode when it aired and thought it was a bit much. To say the least.
When did the Charlie Hebdo thing happen? Does anybody remember that?
A lot later. That was like 2016, 2015, something like that.
Yeah.
Just kind of seeing some parallels there, but I guess time is a flat circle.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I don't have much to say. It's
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a
It's a
lot.
lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. As Ice-T says, that's pretty offensive. So I think that describes it pretty well.
I forgot he was in that episode except for that line.
King of understatement.
I think that's all he does in the episode. He says that line and then goes, all right, cut. Good for Ice-T.
That's about it.
And
Yeah, so of course the college counselor punishes her for that video. Her father starts threatening Mrs. Symes with hang-up calls, but they have an alibi because they were at a tolerance class because of what she did. So it's a classic SVU red herring, but it did give us a great little Mr. Terrorist music video scene, and also Ice-T spitting ice cold facts on what the Bible says. So
can we talk about the line that he said? The father said, because when he says he has an alibi, he said, I have a rabbi, an imam, and a priest that can vouch for me. It's like, A, that's the start of a terrible joke, and B, like, if you actually said that to the police, somehow that is some more incriminating somehow.
I guess I do want to mention that she is a student at a private school, and so the school is within its rights to punish her for her own expressive activity, whether in or out of school. I just thought I'd jump in with that. The calculus will be different for a public school, but
find something that's right in your wheelhouse and make sure.
Well,
I like that.
I got to find something because the rest of it is not. I mean, I judge an international law moot court competition with you, Derrick, and that is the most I do in international law. So
fair enough.
She does keep shouting, "What about free speech?" or something like that. So is that free speech to make a music video like that?
I mean, it is, but it's also the school's free association to not associate with you for doing that.
Free speech does not mean that your speech is free from consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ice cold facts. All right. So the lesion turns out to be cutaneous leishmaniasis. I did have to practice that a few times, which is a parasite carried by the female sandfly. So that means she was in the Middle East in the last month. Turns out she went to Iraq, which her mother had no idea about. So she did volunteer work at the refugee center in New York, helping translate for refugees seeking asylum. The police track a bunch of calls to the center from a man who is desperate to talk to her, who is Haroon Abbas, who also turns out to be dead. Haroon was a taxi driver who was accused of being a terrorist, was tortured in an Iraqi prison camp, and came back to the U.S. after that with help from some friends. So his torture in Iraq included solitary, sleep deprivation, stress positions, ice baths, apparently led him around on a leash, other degrading behavior. Emmy Warner also said that there were markers of recent torture, and then that stress led to a heart attack that ultimately killed him. So they get in contact with Dr. Kelly Elvin at Mercy Hospital Clinic for survivors of torture, who tells the detectives that Abbas wanted to write a memoir about his torture, and that Kate talked about flying to Baghdad to verify his story, and that he was prompted to write the memoir because he saw his torture at a diner on the West Side. And somehow the SVU squad identifies that correct diner because Detective Chester Lake apparently doesn't sleep and frequents diners at 3 a.m. to find a good poached egg.
300 diners on the west side. It's a hell of a lot to canvas.
Not really.
He's psychic now?
New York cabbies come from 80-odd countries and they hang with their own. The Bangladeshis chow at Mo's on Church, and you'll find the Haitians in the coffee shops on Avenue C.
And the Shiites hang in Morningside Heights.
Exactly.
The Zagats are 24-hour diners?
When you don't sleep, you gotta know where to find a good poached egg at 3 a.m.
8 or 9 places in Morningside Heights. Divide and conquer.
You're really lucky to be treated to a rare Chester Lake episode. He has a really weird arc until the end of this season, where, spoiler alert, he kills another officer after a gunfight that has nothing to do with an SVU case. So,
I have a bunch of thoughts. The medical expert, is she just the standby medical expert anytime they need a medical anything?
Yeah, she's the
Like,
main.
she was commenting on things that, like, in the 2 episodes I've seen, she's commenting on 2 wildly different things that she probably doesn't have an expertise on both of them. Okay.
Yeah.
Nobody does that. That's ridiculous.
All right. And then it also kind of, is it a common thing where they sort of drop some plot lines?
Oh, yeah. I have so many questions about, some things in this episode, yeah.
Like they, okay, finish the description and then I'll go more into that.
Okay. So the squad figures that when a boss saw his torture at the diner, that they were worried that they had been ID'd. So then they tortured Haroon and kills Kate as well. That's their operating theory. So they identify Dr. Sutton and George Tomford as the 2 people who a boss identified at the diner. Red flag, Tomford fled his house without telling anyone. So that doesn't look great. So both of them worked at a company called Helios, which is a British mercenary outfit. They had, of course, very good reason to prevent his memoir from coming out, as they hold the largest military contract in Iraq. So again, their theory is Tomford killed Kate and tortured a boss. Helios whisked him out of the country. And Dr. Sutton was also a member of his interrogation team. And when they talked to her, she claims that what she was doing was not torture, but, quote, lawful, humane, and vital for U.S. intelligence. And Emmy Warner is very against all of this. She really wants to hold her accountable. She says, we need to do no harm as doctors, took the Hippocratic Oath, which is not written in shades of gray. But there is this question of greater good. Can you commit certain violations for this, quote, greater good, which they're talking about U.S. intelligence in the War on Terror. So it's, of course, tough to bring Tomford or Helios to trial. Helios is a foreign corporation, so the U.S. attorney will assert jurisdiction, which is also a very common trope in SVU of NYPD not wanting the feds to take over their cases. And I don't always understand this of just give it to them. They'll do this. It will probably actually be more serious charges, but this is definitely a trope of NYPD and the prosecutor, the ADA, doesn't want to give up their case to the feds. So the argument that the prosecution is using is that a boss died in New York. If the doctor could foresee her methods, she taught Tomford, and she could foresee that the methods she taught Tomford would have these effects, then it could be criminally negligent homicide. And so the ADA, Casey Novak, is skeptical. She still thinks it's a long shot, but then Emmy Warner has her listen to stories from people who have been tortured, which I found quite moving, and it seems like she was moved by that. Then they arrest Dr. Sutton, who pleads not guilty.
That woman's interrogation methods led to a boss's death, and God knows how many others.
We can't arrest Sutton for something that happened in Iraq.
No, but a boss died in New York. If a reasonable doctor could have foreseen that her methods would lead to heart failure, heart attack, death.
There's a case for criminally negligent homicide.
And you really think a jury will hold Sutton responsible?
She taught a loose cannon like Tomford how to torture a man to death. That not enough for you?
Someone should be held responsible. It's what Kate Symes would have wanted, and what Haroon Abbas deserves.
Counselor?
It's a stretch. No, it isn't.
Defense attorney Braden files a motion to dismiss on jurisdictional grounds, which the judge rejects, and we'll get into more on that later. At trial, Braden asks Emmy Warner if she can say definitively that Dr. Sutton's interrogation practices directly caused Abbas's death, and she says no, she cannot. So it turns out that the U.S. questioned someone named Abdul Murad, who is the leader of an anti-American Shiite militia. Interrogating him led to information to take down a major munitions dump north of Baghdad. And Helios also interrogated his cousin, Harun Abbas, which I also have questions how that's relevant to anything. Maybe that's one of your questions, Mike. But Dr. Sutton ultimately says they retained life-saving information without causing long-term physical or psychological harm, like waterboarding, beatings, electric shock. Casey asks about these benign interrogation methods like extreme temperatures, stress positions, using hoods to disorient them, ice baths. And yeah, she gets really heated, Dr. Sutton. You know, how would you protect our country? We need intelligence gathering. We're at war. But then, in the middle of the trial, a juror passes out, and Sutton essentially helps to save that juror. And so it changes the public narrative. The judge declares a mistrial. Braden pulled the jury, and they were split. So we'll get into it later of Braden's defense of what she did by using an example of from when he was a cop of strong-arming a defendant to get intel, and that's apparently justifying torture. But in the end, Dr. Sutton has her medical license temporarily suspended. She clearly shows no remorse still, but Dr. Warner is insisting that what she did was wrong, ending with saying that the oath she took does not end just because we're at war. And that's Dick Wolf, baby.
Okay, so I have so many thoughts and questions. We never really resolve who murders Kate. Like, that just kind of dropped. It's the plot of the first 20 minutes of the episode is just gone. No one cares. I'm guessing that happens a lot. Like, it's implied that it's the police whoever tortured the other guy, but we don't know.
Bird, yeah.
It could be somebody else. We don't know.
Colleen, correct me if I'm wrong. This is a common thing in SVU, especially if they're trying to get away from like federal jurisdiction or something like that. Like they have a thing and they're like, oh, we can go after this person that will keep us in New York Supreme Court. We're okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's ridiculous because it's like, just hand it over to the Fed. Like, they'll do it and they'll probably get a worse charge. Like, I don't know why are you so territorial about it?
Yesterday morning.
Oh, that's convenient. We don't have an extradition treaty with Bahrain.
But Helios has an office there.
Jack Rexton was blowing smoke up our ass while arranging to get Tomford out of the country.
So let's pull Rexton in as an accessory.
I don't think it'll be much use. Now, Helios is a foreign corporation. The U.S. attorney will assert jurisdiction.
Given the inflammatory nature of torture and the lack of hard evidence tying Helios to either murder,
Feds will bury us.
So we have 2 dead bodies, and you're saying there's nothing we can do?
Well, and I feel like, I mean, listen, I don't know that many people who are prosecutors, but the people I do know, if there's an obvious federal charge, they'd rather have them handed over and have it be an obvious federal charge and they can handle it. And then you move on to the shit you do in your day-to-day life. Like, in fact, by not handing it to the feds, you're probably reducing what you could get at for them. I mean, yeah, I'm going to guess the U.S. Attorney's Office has more to work with than the New York prosecutors.
All right, so my next big issue, the prosecutors bringing a completely novel case like this. Like, you have to think of a major ethical standard for prosecutors bringing cases is like reasonable likelihood of conviction. And I don't know what New York prosecutors would think. Like, I understand how they got it in New York, but it is still like a big enough stretch that on its own, they should have been like, well, we probably wouldn't get a conviction. Or if we do it, it wouldn't hold up on appeal. You don't agree. Derrick looks puzzled.
No, I agree with you. Actually, I'm trying to remember. Do they ever talk to sort of the DA about this to confirm that they're okay moving forward? Because that would certainly be something where
that would be a very long, crazy conversation.
That would be every single person in that office would be having memos to the DA to be like, we can move forward.
Yeah.
And in a lot of other episodes, they do go into that, and that's like a big part of the episode is fighting with the DA. Cool. Not in this one.
But this one's cool.
Well,
this one's cool. This one's fine.
Yeah, and I'm going to say, based on the next episode, the episode we'll talk about next episode, she seems fine with taking some real flyers at cases.
Yeah. All right, so that was the episode that made me think this originally, but this is like,
right.
This on its own would be like fucking insane for a DA to like, you are really pushing the limits here, and the fact that they have episodes where they go beyond that is like...
because I was going to say, at least with the next one, and obviously we'll get to it in our next episode, there's a political thing with the vaccines, right? Where you're trying to.
Yeah. Sorry, we're talking about another episode. We should probably keep it to this one.
But like I'll say, like keeping to this one, what benefit are they getting? Like they're not getting a public benefit by going after these doctors, in my opinion.
As somebody who's like super anti-torture, I would prefer if we didn't. It would benefit me if we stopped torturing people. I'd be happier.
But go after the torturers, which is the whole point of this, right? Like, you know,
they eventually kind of got there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one other interesting, this is another episode this happens. It's back in season 6. It's also around the war on terror. It's a completely different thing. But the same ADA, Casey Novak, indicts Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense. And she doesn't tell the DA. And he just comes storming into her office like, what the fuck? You can't just do that without running it by me.
No,
it's wild.
Wow.
Yeah. This all tracks.
That's
this would certainly be the one that the DA would be brought in on. Like, there's no question.
100%.
There's no question.
So I want to, since we're talking about the fact that it's very odd that this DA took this case or decided to pursue this as a criminal matter, or the cops pursuing it this way, they said specifically that she could be charged with criminally negligent homicide.
Detectives, how nice to see you again. I'd be happy to answer your questions, but as you can see, I do have...
We're not here to ask questions. Dr. Faith Sutton, you're under arrest for criminally negligent homicide. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one will be appointed to you.
And I just want to read the New York statute here. New York Penal Code, section 125.10. A person is guilty of criminally negligent homicide when, with criminal negligence, he causes the death of another person. Period. Criminally negligent homicide is a Class E felony. The cases that have cited this, the cases where someone has been charged with this, are nowhere near. Several years ago in another country, you taught a guy to do a thing, and he did that thing to someone who then died several years later. That is not criminally negligent behavior. So it's bizarre to me that they have the DA would never pursue this, I think, unless you had a very reckless DA who was acting out of some, political motivations, but they would lose because no, that's not how this works.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we've even talked about this on this podcast before. Foreseeability is a very big part of negligence.
Yeah.
And listen, is there a very clear argument that what she was doing was going to cause harm to the person being caused harm at the moment while the torture is happening?
Yeah.
Yes. But now we're starting to be like, well, then when they get back to the States, they're going to do this further down the road. Like, yeah, there might be a generic argument that they might cause harm to others in the future. That's not foreseeable enough. You're not able to be like, oh, this person is then going to go back to their country and then this many years down the road cause X issue.
Right.
I agree with you.
Right.
And that's, again, that just goes back to Mike's comment that, like, there's so many things as to why they wouldn't bring this case.
Not to condone any of their actions, but it's like, you're charging her for stuff she did in another country under the jurisdiction of the military. No.
Right. Correct.
I just want to make that clear to the listener. Like, this is the crime that we're talking about, and this is why. No.
Yeah, I mean, we can go into some of the doctrinal reasons why they wouldn't do that. You want to start on the sovereign immunity bit?
Yeah, let's do sovereign. Okay. Let's do sovereign immunity first. Yeah, let's jump right into that.
Sure. All right. So sovereign immunity is a legal doctrine that protects the government from being sued without their consent. And it's pretty much, it goes back to ye olden times when we had kings and you couldn't just sue the king. And there are some weird theoretical reasons why we kind of have that, where it's like these laws exist as an extension of the government. You're using it against the government themselves. There are times that they will allow themselves to be sued. So you'll think about the Federal Tort Claims Act, which are times that you can sue the government, or 1984 claim, which is cruel and unusual punishment. I think we've talked about in the past. So this person is not a member of the government. They're actually a contractor for the government. And you might think that's the way around it, but it's not. All right, so derivative sovereign immunity, also known as Yearsley immunity, essentially extending sovereign immunity to the contractors who are working for the government is my understanding of it. And it makes sense in the sense that, like, you wouldn't, if a way around sovereign immunity was for you to just sue the contractors for the government and everything that they did, no one would ever be a contractor for the government. If, I can't sue the IRS for auditing me, but I can sue the contracting firm that was doing the paperwork. No one would ever take that job.
Sure.
Well, and Mike, I can actually jump in sort of a little bit here because I actually worked on a case involving Yearsley.
Oh, okay. There you go.
And we ended up, I work on a case. We planned to bring a case, and then for various reasons did not bring the case because the client didn't want to.
Sure.
But really what Yearsley is like you said, a foreign contractor can sort of get around it. However, the sovereign immunity really only applies if the foreign government authorized their actions, right? So in other words, like, you can't just become a government contractor and then do whatever the hell you want and then be like, well, we're a government contractor, like, we have immunity.
And that's true with sovereign immunity itself. It can't,
Sure.
Just because a police officer has sovereign immunity doesn't mean that you can't sue them for stealing from you.
Right. And effectively, the government contractor has to essentially their actions have to be considered an extension of the government. Like, that's really what it is that the government would have done it if they could have, but they needed a contractor to do it because they don't have the specialty, right? So that's really what that is. And honestly, it makes logical sense, right? It makes logical sense that if the government hires you and you do what the government tells you to do, you get some form of, like, whatever immunity the government would get, you get, essentially.
I agree up until we run into the cruel and unusual punishment issues where, like, suddenly it's not cruel and unusual punishment because they haven't been told not to do this before, but it obviously is because any sensible human being would know it is, or something like that.
Right.
This is a matter for a different day. But
Or we start getting into issues, which I'm going to discuss shortly, about are they violations of international law? And they're violations of international law, but the government tells you to do it.
Fair.
But let's first sort of get into how the sovereign immunity compares to this case. Do we think they could have brought this case?
No, I don't think that. Well, all right. So there are two similar cases floating around. There's the Abu Ghraib cases that was decided before this and probably inspired a lot of this episode. And then there was the ACLU suing the psychiatrist or psychologist who designed the actual torture program almost a decade after this case.
You brought up this case, Salim v. Miller? Is that right?
Yep.
And I was like, I hadn't read that case. What's going on? And come to find out, it's a case that happened 10 years after this episode, which is exactly what happens in this episode.
Yep.
Which, good for the SVU writers to be like, this is going to happen.
It's a civil case against them.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's not criminal, but it's based on very similar facts.
Very similar to the point that I do wonder if that was floating around in the zeitgeist around this time, because this is shortly before, I guess, Obama is elected. Maybe they thought, oh, he's going to come in and prosecute the people who did. This is me speculating wildly right now. He's going to come in and prosecute the people who committed torture because we're anti-torture, and that never happened. So maybe the ACLU kind of took it into their own hands. I don't know. I wasn't following this that closely at that time. Although there are some absolutely insane interviews with the psychiatrists. I remember Vice had one, probably like 2011, 2012. That was like shocking.
Right. Well, and I think the short version of this is, I think there would be a very big question, because I'm not sure if we actually get the information in the SVU episode. Mm-hmm. Did Helios do what the government told them to do, or did they kind of go off and do their own thing? Right.
That's
like, that may have been a big, like, could they have sued them in any capacity? I think that would be one of the big questions.
Yeah. And somehow I'm not an expert on either of the cases that we just mentioned. At least the ACLU lawsuit survived any sovereign immunity defenses to the point that they settled out of court. Right. I imagine it would. How would this have worked out in real life?
Why do I feel like there's got to be some type of insurance situation, right? Or so, like, I'm sort of curious as to, did we get to a point of, like, we don't want this to come out in a trial?
Yeah,
even though a lot of it already came out. A lot of it already came out, but I'm guessing there might be worse shit that was in potentially coming out?
I don't know. It might be things that we already know that they just don't want the spectacle of it. Like, I think we...
Yeah.
Man, we can go down a real deep rabbit hole here, but, like, there are still prisoners being held without trial in Guantanamo Bay for the last 20-plus years.
Yep.
I think we actually have good sources on, like, everything that they might be accused of and everything that was done to them. But I don't know if the government... Sometimes it seems like they just don't want the spectacle of, like, oh, and now we're being put on trial for torturing these people.
Right. Well,
So that-
I mean, and they would basically be giving, they would have given a platform for them to just promote whatever evidence they wanted to, and just officially put it into a public record in a trial, which is a lot.
All right. Okay, so sovereign immunity. You probably couldn't sue them. I'm not quite sure what would happen. If they had a claim, it would probably be them saying that you were either acting outside of what the government authorized you to do, or somehow the government has authorized us to sue you in this case, which I don't think they have. There'd probably be litigation about it, and maybe, like, depending on how that's decided, there would be an out-of-court settlement, is what I think the most likely situation would be.
Can I just jump in real quick on the question of sovereign immunity and say sovereign immunity prevents you from suing the government entity itself for money. You can sue a government agency for injunctive relief to, for example, prevent them from violating your constitutional rights in the future. You can also sue individual government officials for money under the right circumstances as well. Though then you get into questions of, like, qualified immunity, and that's way beyond what we're talking about. But I just wanted to clarify the scope of sovereign immunity, because people sue the United States all the time, and government contractors. But
and there's a whole way of, like, how to bring a foreign government into court, which is a whole. Let's not even try to get into that, because I could spend the next hour on that.
Yeah,
right.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I guess maybe the question we should have asked originally is, can they bring this lawsuit in New York? Why is the New York prosecutor involved? So, in the episode, they talk about continuous jurisdiction.
My client will postpone tonight so she can get back to the business of saving lives. And, given that she's doing God's work, I hope this is the last time we'll force her to set foot in this courtroom.
What is this?
Motion to dismiss on jurisdictional grounds.
We have jurisdiction. Harun Abbas was killed in New York.
Not according to your brief. Prosecution claims Harun Abbas was killed as a direct result of Dr. Sutton's criminal negligence in Iraq.
So there is some confusion about the SVU squad's theory. How did he die? Yeah. And I found some amazing quotes when I was doing this research that, like, I was thrilled to find these. So I found a quote from Judge Learned Hand.
Good old Learned Hand.
We love Learned Hands.
The effects doctrine. So Learned Hand is famous. There was a period of time when the Supreme Court would only cite themselves and Judge Learned Hand. Those were the two sources. So Judge Learned Hand stated, it was settled law that any state may impose liabilities, even upon persons not within its allegiance, for conduct outside its borders that has consequences within its borders, which the state, I can't read that because it's covered up by a smudge. Fuck.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry. All right, I'm going to read it one more time. Any state may impose liabilities, even upon persons not within its allegiance, for conduct outside its borders that has consequences within its borders, which the state reprehends. So not
for the listener's edification, Mike doesn't even have one screen. He's got a screen that has smudges on it.
No, I'm reading, so it's a JSTOR scan of it. So it's like literally a smudge on the fucking...
I thought you meant there was just, like, a big smear of something on your screen.
No, it's like literally just a smudged fucking word.
It's a JSTOR Smudge. I love it. Everything's fantastic.
Is that the name of this episode? JSTOR Smudge?
JSTOR Smudge.
Yeah.
We should get t-shirts made
so
up.
That's the rough doctrine that would... I think that is a reasonable explanation for how you could get this into New York. Another alternative explanation would be like, well, one party's there, they're in New York, they're subject to its laws because they're in personam jurisdiction. They freaking, I guess they live there. The related party happens to have died in New York also. Even if it's an action outside of that, I think that probably is actually enough to get it into New York. Although this would be an area that would get litigated at trial also. Yeah,
I mean, if you go to like Four Corners and from Arizona shoot someone in Colorado, it's not as though, or Utah, sorry. It's not as though Utah can't do anything to you because, you were in a different state when you pulled the trigger.
I do have one more fun quote if you guys want it.
Go for it.
We love your fun quotes. Can you read this one?
Justice Holmes explained, it's simply acts done outside a jurisdiction but intended to produce and producing detrimental effects within justify a state in punishing the cause of the harm as if he had been present at the effect. I was just happy to find a Justice Holmes quote that was relevant.
Gotcha. Good old Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Seems tangentially relevant, but
I'm with you. The state wants to punish you for committing torture.
Fair enough.
The negative effects of torture is how I'm reading it.
Well, and I think, there's a whole part of the like all the evidence is there for the most part, right? Like, with the exception of having to figure out what they actually did in Iraq.
That maybe is the least likely part of all this. It's like, how did they get all this evidence so easily?
So easily.
In 2007.
Because Stabler has connections, man.
Listen, this is New York. They will get this information no matter what. I'm sure, Colleen, that is an SVU trope of just evidence is given.
They found a diner on the West Side just from him saying, I was at a diner on the West Side, and there's how many fucking diners on the West Side?
Yeah. Well, it's New York, so it's only the ones in New York City.
You can't swing a dead cat without hitting a diner in New York City. Like, seriously.
Yeah. The Iraqi taxi drivers only go to this diner on the Upper West Side.
Yeah, that was great.
They don't go to any others. And I love that they don't want the feds involved until Stabler's like, oh, I need to go to the feds with this because they'll have information that's useful to me.
Can we even confirm she left the country?
Funny you should ask. I called Port Authority, and much to my Orwellian delight, they had no problem sending us the videos from the JFK surveillance cameras. This is Terminal 4. There's our girl, Kate, going through baggage security check.
That's all international flights.
Any clue where she's going?
I put in a request to all international airlines. They said it would take a little time.
I got a friend at the Joint Terrorism Task Force. He'll be able to help us out.
Flight 227 JFK to Istanbul, September 17th.
She flew to Turkey.
I checked with customs in Istanbul to make sure she took the flight.
Security cameras across the globe. Munch will never leave his house again.
Yeah, you got lucky. Turkey's one of our few friends in that part of the world.
It's like, yeah, that's maybe why you want to involve the feds.
Honestly, the fact that in 2007 they didn't have, like, in the SVU office, they should have had the politics discussion about this from the very beginning. And the fact that it never comes up is like, the world that they're living in.
It is surprising. I do wonder, because in the earlier episode I mentioned on the War on Terror, I think they get into it a little bit more. Like, Munch talks a lot about the military-industrial complex.
As he is wont to do.
So I wonder if it had already been done. That's why they didn't get into it as much in this episode. Because as we see with the next episode we're going to cover, like, they talk about their views on vaccines, which they normally do get into more political discussions when they bring up a topic like this.
This episode, though, does a weird bit of, like, both sidesing of torture, which is absolutely unnecessary.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Why are you... I don't know. It really bothered me that they were like, oh, we have to give a fig leaf to the people who want to torture people because terrorism.
So in the Vice interview that the actual psychiatrist did, which is shocking that they ever did that, and then I watched this 10 years ago, so I don't know if I'm getting the quote exactly right, but they were offered, like, oh, would you be waterboarded yourself? And the psychiatrist said, no, I'd rather have both my arms ripped off. I was like, that's where he stands on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, SVU likes to both sides things, like their Black Lives Matter episodes likes to both sides.
Oh, shocking that
things.
the show about law enforcement.
Right. But they try to be like, oh, look, we're woke on this. But then they both sides. Yeah, it's.
Hi, everyone. Derrick here with a brief message. The Not So Grand Jury is sponsored by my law firm, Moore Law PLLC. One of Moore Law PLLC's many practice areas is business law. If you are a business owner or someone who is thinking of starting up a new or side business, you need a legal team who can efficiently provide you legal counsel, keeping you and your business away from potential legal issues, and if necessary, representing you in any disputes that do arise. We pride ourselves on being cost efficient while also getting to know our clients. If you want less stress and more support, you need Moore Law. If you would like to set up a free consult, please click on the link in the show notes, visit our website, www.mooreatty.com, that's mooreatty.com, or email us at contact@mooreatty.com. And now, back to the show. So should I talk about torture?
Yes, since we're talking about torture, why shouldn't they both sides this, Derrick?
So I'm going to take the fact that we're talking about torture here means we're getting into international law. We have not talked about international law on this podcast before. So I get to try to explain in a relatively short period of time international law. I'm going to apologize to all the international law scholars out there and those of us who are good friends with Geoff and me from the International Law Student Association moot court tournament that we are actively a part of. I'm going to miss a lot of things, but I'm going to try to explain it to the sort of, base viewer who is not necessarily understanding of international law. So, and by the way, why are we talking about international law? We talk about it because there's multiple mentions of the Geneva Conventions in this episode and I think there's actually one of the arguments that is made at the trial is basically that the acts that were committed were legal in Iraq.
If my client's actions were legal where the alleged negligence occurred, the prosecution does not have jurisdiction.
You're arguing that torture is legal in Iraq?
It's not torture.
Dr. Sutton's benign method of interrogation was implemented in Iraq where it is indeed legal.
Not according to the Geneva Conventions. In Hamdan versus Rumsfeld, the Supreme Court said that violating the conventions is a federal crime.
Yes, but according to 2002...
essentially, right? They're claiming that torture was effectively legal there, which is an interesting argument, to say the least. But let me get into the fact that why that's a completely bullshit argument. So basically, I'm going to talk about what is called public international law. Public international law is sort of the set of norms that is aimed at regulating the interaction between, I'll just call them subjects of international law, but in other words, foreign states, nations, things along that nature. And I say it's a set of norms rather than sort of like a body of law or a set of statutes because there are no necessarily statutes or regulation in international law. There is no Congress for the world. There is no way to create a regulation. International law is basically a way to create a framework which, sort of contributes to this stable, organized, consistent international relations, which, by the way, is not a thing. There's no way that it's stable, organized, or anything. But there are sort of sources of international law that help us get to what public international law is. So the main sources are treaties, customary international law, and general principles of law. Treaties, those are straightforward. Those are formal agreements between what I'll call foreign states. I don't want to confuse the viewer when I say states because a lot of our listeners are U.S. residents. When they think of states, they think of the 50 states of the United States. When I mean foreign states, I mean nations and other sort of nations, countries, foreign. And there's a lot. There you go. Foreign sovereigns. That's a good way of describing it because there's not necessarily countries, not necessarily nations. Some people do not recognize other foreign sovereigns, but here we are. So treaties are the straightforward one, and that's in fact what the Geneva Conventions are referring to, and I'll get to that in a second. The second source is customary international law, which are international obligations that have arisen from the practices of foreign sovereigns. There must be general and consistent practice by the foreign sovereign, as well as a sense of legal obligation, which is known by the shortened Latin phrase opinio juris. A good example of this is granting immunity to visiting heads of state or sort of government heads. there is in fact no treaty that codifies that foreign ministers are shielded from prosecution in a foreign country when they travel there in their official capacity. This is just something that has arisen out of customary national law, and it is, there are exceptions, but for the most part, when you travel in your official capacity, you are shielded from prosecution in a foreign country. And then there's these general principles of law, which is the third source, which are just universally recognized rules and concepts that are foundational to legal systems worldwide. Principles like good faith, where you are trying to act honestly and fairly. Res judicata, which basically means if a court has decided a case on the same subject matter between the same parties, they can't then take it again and try them again. And impartiality of judges, where theoretically judges should not be biased against one party. These are general principles of law that a vast majority of foreign sovereigns, have as part of their legal system. And there are also subsidiary means for determining the rule of law in international law, such as judicial decisions of each of the individual foreign sovereigns and teaching of highly qualified publicists.
Derrick?
Yes, Jeffrey, would you like to tell me how my 3-minute version of international law sucked?
No, I just have a quick snide question for you.
Ooh, fun.
Does this podcast make you an Article 38D scholar?
Absolutely. We do know some Article 38D scholars.
Everyone got that
Yes,
joke,
I
right?
know. There are like 6 listeners who got that.
For the 6 listeners who actually understood what we just said, I am not a fucking Article 38 scholar. However, we do know people who are Article 38D scholars, and I would like them on the podcast. So please reach out and tell us what you want to talk about, and we can explain on that future episode what the hell it is to be a highly qualified publicist. Geoff, that was so nerdy, like next level nerdy. It was great.
We do a podcast about the law and pop culture. What do you want from me?
And you somehow are out nerded our typical stuff. So it's kind of funny. But anyway, so what does that have to do with this episode? Well, in this episode, as I said, the defense basically argues in the trial that the acts committed were legal in Iraq. But the SVU squad talks about the Geneva Conventions and how it is completely illegal or people against the Geneva Conventions. So you may have heard what the Geneva Conventions are. I'm also going to talk about another treaty, which is the Convention Against Torture. So the Geneva Conventions and the Conventions Against Torture both prohibit torture and other forms of cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment. The Geneva Conventions, and I say conventions because there's actually 4 different conventions. There was a first convention that was adopted all the way back in 1864 and then revised multiple times. There's another couple other ones that were adopted in various early 1900s. But basically, in 1949, there was a sort of all the Geneva Conventions were revised and adopted into what we consider to be the Geneva Conventions. And then there were multiple protocols afterwards that sort of have modified the 1949 conventions. But under the 1949 convention, so this was, again, many, many years ago, and even in this episode, almost 60 years earlier, there is an explicit, statement in the Geneva Convention 3 that for physical or mental torture is expressly forbidden, and any other form of coercion to obtain information from prisoners of war. And that is essentially what's happening here. Now, the UN Convention Against Torture, which is I'm going to say not new, it's still from I think it was from 87 is when it went into effect. That deals with, defining what torture is outside of the concept of war. So just generally, and it defines torture as severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, inflicted for the specific purposes by a public official or someone acting in an official capacity. And so those conventions are basically what say that torture is not cool. And I'm going to tell you right now, the not so grand jury's official position is torture is bad. We are not pro-torture. We are anti-torture. And I don't think this is a question. Now, granted, we do know that in the years after 9/11, people were trying to get answers, and they were trying to find out who funded the terrorists, did someone encourage them, blah, blah, blah. I don't really care what they thought at the time, but what I can tell you is we know very much that torture does not give you answers. It gets you incorrect answers. it forces people to tell you whatever the hell you want to hear so they will stop torturing you. That is what almost unanimously every report that's ever come out has indicated, that any torture that has been committed has not gotten good, reliable information. And so that is one of the big reasons why we're here, is that the torture that they supposedly, that the, doctor who was on trial in this episode, the methods that she told, that she basically consulted on and said that they should do. I like how she called it humane. That's adorable. For those of you who have ever read about the torture memos and what happened at, and this is what this episode is based upon, is what happened at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq in the early years of the Iraq War. It wasn't great. This wasn't a simple, interrogating them for hours. This was true torture. And some of the examples that Colleen had used earlier, those are sort of the bland versions of what happens in real life at the Abu Ghraib prison. This episode is certainly based on, when the U.S. Army and the CIA committed torture against detainees in the Abu Ghraib prison. Abu Ghraib was a maximum security prison in Iraq, used by the U.S. to, and I'm going to use this in quotes, interrogate suspects after it invaded Iraq. Basically, it was so the U.S. could torture people for all practical purposes. And there have been a lot of things that have come to light, including the torture memos that actually came to light after this episode. Right, Colleen? They came out, late 2000s, early 2010s? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, and I think they did a big investigation, the Senate Intelligence Committee. That's what the movie The Torture Report, I think everyone should watch that, is based on that. But that was early 2010s that they did a big dive into that a lot of this came out in.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, and I know it's mentioned in the episode, Hamdan v. Rumsfeld, which was a 2006 Supreme Court case, that decided that, the Geneva Conventions can be interpreted by U.S. courts, and it can, they essentially can, declare that someone committed acts against the Geneva Conventions for all practical purposes. At least that's my recollection of that case. If I'm wrong on that, we're going to delete that. But I believe that's what that case basically said. And so when we're let's be honest. As we said, SVU loves to two-side things. They love to try to find a way to argue it. It's just bullshit here. There's just I'm sorry. Even in 2007, we were fully aware that torture didn't work. We did things in the sort of after 9/11 because we could. Honestly, there's no other better way to describe it. The government said, get answers, and they didn't care whether the answers were true or not. They wanted to get answers. That's kind of the short version of all this. And so what I'm going to sit here and tell you is that what we did was bad. It was really bad. And in fact, there is a case, and again, this is sort of the SVU predicting stuff. There was a case, so Mike has already talked about the Salim v. Miller case, where there was a civil case against the doctors who consulted on the torture methods. There was also a case where the New York-based nonprofit, the Center for Constitutional Rights, filed a lawsuit on behalf of 4 Iraqi men against the defense contractor CACI, which I think is sort of the Helios of, this episode. And they were a U.S. military defense contractor who provided interrogation services at the Abu Ghraib prison. And after 15 years of litigation, so we're in November of 2024, a jury finally ruled that the CACA must pay the 3 Iraqi men $14 million each, $3 million in compensatory damages and $11 million in punitive damages due to the harm suffered back in 2004. And that was even after a mistrial in early 2024, and they had to retry the case. So there was and as you can imagine, a lot of discovery battles, a lot of appeals, 15 years of litigation, a lot of shit happened. But that finally came to at least a conclusion. That, to my knowledge, was the only time at least so far, that anyone has actually gotten paid out of what happened at the Abu Ghraib prison. So, yes. But anywho, that gives you sort of a backstory as to why this episode even exists. Let me ask the question. What else do we want to talk about in this episode?
Well, I'll just add fun fact about John Yoo, who is the architect of the torture memos. He is serving on the National Board for Education Sciences, which advises the Department of Education on scientific research and investments.
Amazing.
Trump appointed him in 2020. I think he may have just finished his term as of last year, but that's ridiculous in 2024 that anyone is taking his scientific advice.
Well, didn't he go off and teach at like Stanford Law or something?
Yeah. Yep.
This whiskey's delicious.
My notes were much more fun. Mine was about how the cinematography kind of sucks.
For the listener, John Yoo was a George W. Bush administration official and drafted a memo that provided basically a legal fig leaf for the torture practices that were undertaken in Iraq and Afghanistan.
All right. Anyone else? You guys have anything else you want to talk about in this episode other than the fact that there's like 6 missing plot points?
I was just gonna add 3 more missing plot points. I'll just drop them in. So I'm confused because in the beginning, I don't even know how Harun Abbas ended up back in Iraq, because he fought in the Gulf War. And then, as his wife said, he was offered asylum in the U.S., but then how was he tortured back in Iraq? Did they kidnap him from the U.S.? Did he go back there? Like, what?
He just voluntarily wanted to go visit, I guess.
I think there was a line about this, but yeah, no.
I've watched it many times. I still couldn't figure it out.
Okay.
I'll say I've only watched this episode twice. Colleen's probably watched it accidentally 15 times. I'm confident she would have figured that out by now.
And I went back and specifically looked at this part. And I'm like, this still makes no fucking sense. I don't understand. Okay. And then during the trial, when it comes out that it was like Murad was the one who was interrogated, and they were like, Abbas was his cousin. Oh, like, what is that? Right. Why is that relevant? Why is it being the cousin is like, oh, that means he's a terrorist too?
Because
I wonder, does this mean that there was enough on the cutting room floor that would have explained this, or like it doesn't seem like the kind of show that has like an extra 40 minutes cut out of it. Like maybe the original script had an explanation, but
they could have. I feel like by season 9 it was a pretty well-oiled machine that they didn't do things like that, but maybe they did cut something out that was key to that. But I'm like, there's something, but how they frame it is just like, oh, and it turns out it was his cousin. Like, all right, so you're gonna torture his cousin just because he's his cousin?
I mean, back then there was an incredible amount of like guilt by association.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was
back then. Today still, but
right. But I mean, at the time, it was if you had the same last name as somebody else, then they assumed you had like close connections or something. And
there are certainly examples, and in fact, I forget I think they've been released from Guantanamo Bay relatively recently. There was someone who just because of an error in translation said something wrong, and they ended up in Guantanamo Bay for 20 years. Like, it is the littlest thing that if we thought that you were involved, go fuck yourself.
It was just an excuse pretty much to torture people.
Again, I said it before, it was an excuse to torture people.
And then just a final thing that's a bit of a goof. Melinda Warner is seen in the gallery before she testifies, but she's a witness, so shouldn't be in the gallery before she testifies.
I just don't understand what her job is. Because in this episode of the other job,
she's the medical examiner.
She's the expert witness she's the ultimate expert witness.
Well, no, she's the medical examiner of New York.
Yeah.
For all of New York.
All of it. Everything. She's the New York medical examiner.
I think New York City, right?
Right, for New York City. And apparently has all the time in the world, even though she's the head medical examiner of New York City, to just sit in a courtroom and chill out for days at a time.
But I don't think she's chief medical examiner.
She becomes chief at some point.
Much later.
Maybe she's not in this. So she's not in this episode. She's just
in another
rando,
decade.
Which, by the way, makes it even more likely she wouldn't be in the courtroom because she has real work to do as a medical examiner.
I mean, there's so much here that we haven't really touched on. Like, yeah, during the trial, she seems to be used to introduce a bunch of evidence that is not something she could introduce. Like Abbas's doctor's recording of the conversation.
Oh yeah, wait, I had a bunch of notes on this actually.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked at all about doctor-patient confidentiality, or there's a whole medical malpractice tag on the end that we were thinking about doing, but frankly, med mal is such a mess of law that I didn't have time to go do the research.
Right. Well, and I would say to Colleen's point, let's get right to sort of, a point that she had made, which is she should not be in the courtroom if she's about to be testifying.
Oh,
as a general, like that's a big no. I looked it up. It's New York Evidence Rule 6.03, where, and it's just, I think it happens in almost in every case, which is if you are going to be testifying, they do not want you to see any aspect of the trial before you testify. Now, there are, of course, if you're a party, you can be there. If you are the representative of a corporation, things like that. But if you are just a fact witness or even an expert witness, you are not going to be in the gallery. Like, you are going to be, either outside or not even in court until you have to testify. So that's a very good point. And that happens, I feel like, in SVU all the time based on what I remember.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and just to clarify, so at this time, she has the title of medical examiner. She eventually becomes deputy chief medical examiner when the deputy at the time in season 16 is a cross-dressing serial killer. So
Dick Wolf.
Oh my God.
There you go.
We love ourselves some Dick
Wolf, baby.
Is deputy chief a thing for a medical examiner's office?
Maybe.
I mean,
according to lawanorders.fandom.com. Yes.
But by the way, she would not, let's be honest, even if she wanted to go watch the trial, she wouldn't have time to watch a trial. A medical exam, like a standard medical exam in New York, has a lot of shit to do.
There's a lot of other issues we can go over. I think we've kind of hit the big points here.
Yeah.
You guys ready to?
So shall we jump into whether we think this episode is legally accurate or not?
Spoilers, it wasn't.
It was, yeah. So, Mike, go first. You seem to be clearly what we're all thinking right now.
Yeah, no. So there's too many things that they get wrong for anyone to really consider this legally accurate. So it's a big no on that for me. It is interesting that they kind of predicted the future with the psychiatrist, psychologist thing. That's the part that I found the most interesting, but they got too much other things wrong. As far as did I enjoy it? No. It could be on in the background. It wouldn't offend me, but no, it's not a good show.
Yeah, on the law, no. For a little bit of background, like when I was growing up in the 90s, Law and Order, the original series, TOS, I guess, was on a lot. I mean, every Wednesday night was, it was the West Wing, well, later in the 90s, but the West Wing and Law and Order, and I think ER then round up that sort of night of NBC dramas that were on most nights. And I remember watching some SVU growing up. I think I mentioned that growing up. By then I was an adult. Once this came out when I was like 6. This series started when I was about 16, I think, if I have my years right. Anyway, I don't know if maybe it's just because now I'm older, but looking back at this, I don't know how I watched as much of this as I did. If they're all of this quality, it took me several sittings to get through this episode. The next episode that we're going to talk about was an easier watch, but man, was it a slog for me. It's
not even that long.
No, I mean, they're only 45. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's network TV and you subtract like 15 minutes of commercials. But yeah, this was rough. The writing was the opposite of subtle. The main cast is good, but everybody else they had on, I felt kind of like they were acting at gunpoint. It was really bizarre. I didn't like it. I didn't like it. So no.
So you're no on both.
Yeah.
So basically, I can say whatever the heck I want, and it's going to be a no on both.
Yeah.
But what I'll tell you is, it's crap on the law. We all know that. We've stated that multiple times. I didn't enjoy it, and I will say that I love international law. I think it's a lot of fun. I did not enjoy this episode. I think this is going to be a King of the Hill thing where we're going to have an different conversation next episode, because with King of the Hill, I liked one of them and hated the other one. Spoiler alert, could happen here. But nevertheless, Colleen, you tell me, you're an SVU aficionado. Did you like this episode?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say I hate any SVU episode. I like them all. I agree on the law. I don't think any of this would actually happen. But yeah, I enjoyed it. Sorry I forced you all to...
Oh, no.
It's like, I mean, Mike forced us to watch King of the Hill, so...
Yeah, we're going to watch more of this. We're not done.
Yeah. I subjected us all to How to Get Away with Murder, and this was miles better than How to Get Away with Murder. So, I think on both the law and quality. So
I think it's pretty clear. Both fails. Colleen likes SVU, but that's just because she likes SVU generally.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Good times, guys.
Cool.
The Not So Grand Jury is sponsored by Morwa P. LLC.
The opinions expressed in the Not So Grand Jury are those of the hosts themselves and not of their respective employers.
The theme music for the Not So Grand Jury is from Gustav Holst's Jupiter and is in the public domain.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, if you want to suggest future movies, or even if you want to offer corrections, you can email us at notsograndjury@gmail.com or message us on any of our social media accounts.
The Not So Grand Jury is copyright 2025, all rights reserved.